The DCEU, which tried to be the MCU but for DC, turned out to be an utter disaster. And they're trying again with James Gunn as their new Kevin Feige. I want to just talk about the DCEU and what I think about the new DCU. For those of you who are unaware, I'll give a brief summary. Basically, James Gunn, the director of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, was fired by Disney because of political tweets from about 10 years ago. During that brief time period, Warner Bros. Picked him up and got him to do the Suicide Squad. Before that movie was done, however, Disney decided to get James Gunn back to work on Guardians of the Galaxy 3. So he finished the Suicide Squad and then went back to Disney. But before Guardians of the Galaxy 3 came out, the DCEU was tanking both critically and commercially. So they decided to hire James Gunn as their new Kevin Feige, basically. He finished Guardians 3 and then he headed back to WB. To understand how desperate DC was and still is, I need to show you how much of a sad and pathetic abomination the DCEU was. So in 2008, Marvel's doing great with their new MCU thing that's doing pretty good. So DC wants to build their own cinematic universe. They decided to try and start with Green Lantern in 2011. And while I don't think the movie's that bad, I can see why everyone else hated it, and also the movie bombed. So they scrapped that movie and restarted with Man of Steel and called this new universe the DCEU. This movie did okay, and it's gotten better with time. Things are off to a pretty good start. And then they instantly make Batman vs Superman. For the MCU, Civil War was their 13th movie. And that movie only works because of our knowledge of these characters and our years of investment in getting to know their worldviews. And then we get punched in the gut when they are fighting each other because we understand where they're coming from. Batman vs Superman, I think, is a movie with lots of highs and lots of lows.
Why did you say that now?
I think it would have done a lot better if they would have released it much later in the DCEU. Now, while Batman vs Superman was releasing, Suicide Squad was getting made. However, Batman vs Superman, the dark and serious superhero movie, was doing horrible, and Deadpool, the fun and energetic movie, was doing great. So DC panicked and botched the dark and gritty version that David Ayer was working on for basically a film-length music video, and it did horrible. But then Wonder Woman comes out and it actually does pretty good. Maybe the DCEU can recover from this. No, they actually reached a new low after this. Zack Snyder had a vision for his Justice League movie. It's a 4-hour superhero epic. It's awesome. Except WB didn't trust him after BVS. So mid-production, they waited for an excuse to kick him out. So when his daughter committed suicide, they called it a family tragedy and kicked him out. And they brought in Joss Whedon to finish the film.
Well, he ain't getting any deader. Back to work.
We have Zack Snyder's Justice League now, more on that later, but it's a 4-hour long and serious superhero epic. Joss Whedon, if you don't know, is the director of The Avengers and Age of Ultron. Just because he made a really good superhero ensemble film doesn't mean that he can fix the mess that wasn't even there in the first place. Because while The Avengers is great in its own right, it's a fun and quippy blockbuster. So when you combine these two visions, you get this.
I don't think I've ever seen such a Frankenstein's monster of a film.
An overweight and alcoholic Ben Affleck was brought back in for hastily organized reshoots.
What actually happened here is they filmed the Justice League, and then he goes on to film Mission Impossible, where he has this really cool look. During the filming of that movie, they had to do reshoots. They wouldn't let him shave his mustache.
The color grading is so bad at points that it actually made me laugh out loud.
The cameras that they use are all totally different, and they try to just mash these two things together so when you look at it, it doesn't go together.
This movie did so bad that they scrapped several planned projects. With no real plan anymore, they just started to put out lots of solo movies with no real direction. Some of these movies actually did really well. Aquaman and Shazam got sequels greenlit, which is good and all, but that meant that they had to spend more of their time on less important films. But then, in 2020, they announced that the Snyder Cut will be coming out in 2021 because they needed something to put on HBO Max. This is the vision that Zack Snyder originally had when he was working on Justice League before WB kicked him out. This movie was met with a ton of praise. That sounds great, but it's not. With this praise, lots of stories came out exposing what happened behind the scenes of the original Justice League and how horrible Joss Whedon and WB treated everyone on set. So even when they succeeded, they still failed. However, things aren't looking all bad. This was when WB was able to snatch up James Gunn while he was fired from Disney to make them the Suicide Squad. The movie bombed, but it resonated well with audiences. Because this established James Gunn as a DC guy, giving him his opportunity as the new DC Kevin Feige, maybe this movie was the savior of DC. So things are going pretty good at DC actually. Peacemaker came out, and while I didn't watch it, I heard it was really good. And The Batman came out. It's not a DCEU movie, but it's a DC movie, and it did really well. So that's 4 hits in a row. Things are going really good. However, they delayed Black Adam so that it came out several months after The Batman.
Black Adam will now move to October 21st, right before Halloween, playing through Thanksgiving.
And at that point, the hype kind of died down. So it bombed. And because of that, they decided to majorly course correct and get James Gunn back and use the Flash to reset everything. And just kind of let the other 3 movies come out and hope they're good and turn a profit. Shazam 2 came out, and then it bombed hard. It wasn't bad, it was just too generic to get general audiences in theaters. I mean, I didn't even see it in theaters. You see, if it was released a few years ago, it probably would have turned a profit. But nowadays, generic superhero movies don't cut it. But if The Flash did well, that'd be a huge win for DC. It bombed. The Flash became both the biggest Warner Bros. And biggest comic book movie bomb of all time. Nearly everything was going against this movie. Ezra Miller got in lots of trouble with the law, and everyone hates him now. This is still technically a DCEU movie, and it's now a dead universe, so why is anyone invested? People are getting sick of generic superhero movies, let alone multiverse movies. If the movie was trying to rely on nostalgia to sell tickets, Batman '89 is too old for most people. Most of the people nostalgic for Keaton's Batman are in their 30s and 40s, the people where it's hard to have time to go to the movies. The VFX are horrible, and the word of mouth was really bad. The Flash reset the timeline, and is now the start of the new DCU, and Blue Beetle is the first entry that is entirely set in it. As of recording, Blue Beetle came out super recently, and I haven't seen it yet, but I don't think that will affect my thoughts much. Okay, so I just checked out Blue Beetle, and it was okay. It really had a very upbeat style to it that I dug. It actually felt like it was directed by a person and not a machine, but the story was way too generic. It just followed a way too basic formula. The movie was fine enough, I guess, but it just felt like an uninspiring and recycled Spider-Man 1. The characters and core story is pretty good, it just needed a bit more time to get the script less generic. So I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 10. Blue Beetle has almost no effect on my excitement for the DCU, and neither does Aquaman 2. No matter how good or bad these movies are, they were originally meant to be DCEU movies. And since The Flash came out first, resetting the timeline, these movies just had to come out so they can try to scrape up any amount of money they can to make a profit. So James Gunn is now the head of DC. Like I said earlier, he's basically DC's Kevin Feige, overseeing everyone's projects, thus making his own cinematic universe. This whole thing is very confusing, and they've never been too clear on things. People like Jason Momoa and John Cena are staying as Aquaman and Peacemaker. Other people might be staying, but they might leave, like Gal Gadot. And then people like Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck are out as Superman and Batman. Batman might be played by that one guy at that one horrible scene at the end of The Flash that I don't want to spoil because I know you didn't see it. Or it might be played by someone else. Nonetheless, I say this now, but I have faith in this franchise. I love James Gunn, and he has proven 5 times in a row that he can make even wacky superhero movies and somehow finds the humanity in it. Even though he's not going to be directing many of these projects, that doesn't decrease my excitement. In fact, it almost elevates it. James Gunn said that he'll let the directors direct the movies or shows that they want to make.
The director's visions and all of the creators is unique, and I want to be true to those stories.
Which has proven to be very successful. Just look at Zack Snyder's cut versus Joss Whedon's cut of Justice League. Or even look at James Gunn, who has had a little more freedom than most MCU directors, and look at how amazing his Guardians movies turned out to be. I think it's safe to say that the DCU will top phases 4 and 5 of the MCU. But if I'm being honest, I don't know if it'll top phases 1 through 3 though. I agree that the MCU is not good now, but I would still call the MCU my favorite movie franchise because of the first 3 phases. I adore the first 3 phases, and I honestly think that it's possible that the DCU could top it. Now, I don't know how the whole TV side of it will work. If the MCU is anything to go off of, it's that TV and movie formats do not work well together. It works with things like Star Wars. The shows in Star Wars are very optional, and it's mainly for the people very invested in it who want some more good stories. movies. With the MCU though, the shows are not optional, and it's really hurt them. Want to watch Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness? You gotta watch a whole season of WandaVision. Want to watch Captain America 4? Watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier first. I know many people who have kept up with the MCU very passionately in the past, but now I've given up because it's too much for them to watch. Now I wouldn't be too worried about this if the DCU seems to be taking the Star Wars route by making inconsequential side stories, but James Gunn said that the DCU is connected through movies, TV, gaming, and animation. He's not too clear here. Maybe the shows aren't necessary, but maybe they are. Which for me personally, it's not too worrying, because I'm curious enough about this DCU that I'll probably be checking them all out. I'm just concerned for when the new Justice League comes out and a casual viewer who wants to watch it has to sit through 5, maybe good, maybe bad seasons of television. However, there is something that Gunn said that has me concerned personally. It's the gaming part of things. You see, I want to consider myself a gamer. I play a few Mario or Zelda games here and there, but video games aren't totally for me. And I know that I will not be playing these DCU games that are put out, so I'm just hoping they won't be too consequential to the plot of movies or shows I want to check out. But if they are consequential to the plot of films or shows, that'll be tough for me, but I couldn't imagine how amazing it would be for the people who do play them and see the character they have controlled for hours appeared in this new movie. I want to mention a few projects that I think are worth noting. Now, everything that I say, understand that this comes from the perspective of someone who hasn't read a single comic book. I'm just talking about the general knowledge that I do have. I'm very excited for both Superman and Supergirl. Superman Legacy sounds amazing to me. James Gunn is directing it, and that has me ecstatic. Most people associate James Gunn with the dumb and goofy, but surprisingly great superhero movies, and for a good and understandable reason. But I think his movies are dumb and goofy, yes, but all his movies have an incredible amount of heart and passion put into them. And I know that James Gunn loves Superman, so to see him apply all that to Superman, I can't wait to see that. Also, Supergirl has me very intrigued. I don't know much about Supergirl. I haven't even seen her old movie, but what I've heard about her sounds fascinating. She's a Kryptonian like Superman, but she wasn't raised by loving parents, and as a result, she has a very negative view on Earth. She's the only gender-swapped superhero that sounds interesting to me. There's also the new version of Batman coming out. I honestly don't mind that we'll get the DCU Batman and the Batman at the same time. Batman is a quintessential part of DC, and doing a DC universe without him, that isn't even an option. And the Batman is its own little franchise that started before the DCU, and I'm just glad that it's able to do its own thing in the corner without getting shut down. Okay, last one I want to mention. The Authority will probably be a flop. It's supposed to be a movie with a boatload of new characters who are super powerful and all have their own unique personality and view on the Earth, all packed in within a 2-hour plus movie. Oh. Overall, I'm excited for the new DCU. Yeah, I think it's more complicated than it has to be, but as a non-comic book reader, I'm excited to see probably really good adaptations of these characters that I've heard are so cool. I think it's also good that they've just let the DCEU die. It's probably for the best.